My name is Dimitri Broxton, Senior Director of Education at MOAD, and this is In the Artist Studio. Each month, join me and my colleagues today as we visit some of our favorite artists in their studios to see what they've been currently working on. We follow all talks with an audience Q&A, so if you are with us here on Zoom, we invite you to enter your questions into the Q&A panel at the bottom of your screen throughout the conversation. If you're joining us on Facebook, you can also enter your comments into the chat function and we'll bring those over. So please ask your questions, but also just engage and let us know what you're thinking throughout. Please visit our website to see which artists we have coming up. You can also go back and watch all of our past talks on Museum of the African Diaspora's YouTube channel. This series was made possible by generous donations by the Westridge Foundation, MOAD members, and all of you. Thank you so much. Today, I am joined by Bayeté Ross Smith, an interdisciplinary artist, photographer, filmmaker, and education worker working at the intersection of photography, film and video, visual journalism, 3D objects, and new media. He lives in Harlem, New York. He is Columbia Law School's inaugural artist in residence, a presidential leadership scholar, a TED resident, a Creative Capital Awardee, an Art for Justice Fund Fellow, a BPMPlus grantee, and a POV New York Times embedded media maker. His work is in the collections of the Smithsonian Institution, the Oakland Museum of California, the Birmingham Museum of Art, the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture, and the Brooklyn Museum. He has exhibited internationally with the Goethe Institute in Ghana, Foto Museum in Belgium, the Lianzhou Foto Festival in China, and America House in Ukraine, amongst others. His collaborative projects along the way and Question Bridge Black Males have shown at the 2008 and 2012 Sundance Film Festival, respectively. His work has also been featured at the Sheffield Doc Fest and the LA Film Festival. He has also created a series of public art projects with organizations such as the Jerome Foundation, Brick Arts Media, the Amistad Center, the Laundromat Project, the NYC Parks Department, Hartford YMCA, San Francisco DA's office, and the California Judicial Council. His work has been published in numerous publications, including the New York Times, The Guardian, National Geographic Learning, Question Bridge Black Males in America 2015, Disintegration, The Splintering of Black America 2010, Posing Beauty, African American Images from the 1890s to the Present 2009, Black, A Celebration of a Culture 2005, The Spirit of Family 2002, and the Philadelphia Inquirer. Bayeté recently completed a tour of South Africa with the US Department of State's US Speakers Program. He is working as the inaugural artist in residence at Columbia Law School and created 2 installations, Visualizing Violence and Our Kind of People, CLS. In 2022, he installed 2 boombox sculptures in Montgomery, Alabama, and Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. Bayeté, thank you so much for joining us today. Wow, that is such an impressive record of accomplishments. I'm thrilled to have you in conversation today.
Yeah, thank you for having me here. You know, I feel a little embarrassed. I wanted to give you like all the different things that I've done so you could select what would be most pertinent to this conversation. I did not expect you to go through all of it in its entirety, bro. So, but I appreciate that. That's great.
I agree. Today, put into the comments, we love it. I love to hear all that you've been engaged with, and I just think, you know, given the subject matter that you tackle through your artwork or your socially engaged practice, I would even say, I think it's important to know everywhere that you've been, and then also giving people touch points for that, because you're not just all over the United States, but you've shown your work all over the world. I think that's impressive.
Yeah, I just need 2 more continents, Australia and Antarctica.
Let's make that happen. Today has a connection to Australia, so today I'm putting you on the line right there. I don't know about Antarctica though.
Yeah, Antarctica is the hard one, but
Yeah, right.
Gotta be some art down there. I mean, there's people down there.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Nancy says you can do it. Hey, Nancy. Oh my gosh, I love it. So I want to jump into this conversation before we start showing images of your work and just kind of go into your background. I am an educator, and so I always ask this question. Hey, today, what sparked your interest in art, and when did you decide to become a professional artist?
That's an excellent question, because it's really important for people to remember that being an artist is an ongoing process, but it's also an accessible and attainable thing to be in the world. And it's not magic or anything that makes us
Mhm.
artists. It's just a series of decisions and a dedication to creating work and thinking about the most productive ways to create work. So I started, making photographs when I was in high school. I had a Pentax K1000 camera that shot film. And actually my mother gave that to me after I'd taken a couple of photography classes in high school. And then she noticed that I really like photography. So she bought me that camera. And then I made photographs, for a bit, kind of as a hobby. But when I went to college at FAMU, Florida A&M University, which is a HBCU, I originally thought that I was going to study business administration. And so I was a business administration major. And then in my sophomore year, I just realized that it wasn't something that was inspiring to me. And I really didn't have a substantial interest in it. And so I decided to switch my major to photography, which at FAMU was through the School of Journalism. So I ended up getting my start as a visual journalist, working with Knight Ridder way back in the day. So I worked at the Tallahassee Democrat, which is the local newspaper in Tallahassee, Florida, where FAMU is located, and then also the Philadelphia Inquirer and the Charlotte Observer. And then as the industry started to change, a lot of my mentors in journalism were telling me that I would have to find another career path other than the traditional one of working at a small paper and then working your way up and spending your career as a visual journalist. So I decided to go to art school and get an MFA in order to give myself an additional skill set and have more options in terms of how to tell and create the stories I wanted to create, and the different paths I could take over the course of my career.
Was this kind of like right at the advent of the internet? Is that why they told you would need a different path, or what was the
I'm
reasoning
trying
behind
not to
that?
date myself, bro. No.
I think we're close to the same age, so.
Oh yeah. No, we are. We've had that conversation before. Yeah, because actually I was like, man, it's good to see you. I ain't seen you in a month of Sundays. And I was just chuckling to myself in the back of my mind. I was like, yeah, last time we caught up, each of us had a lot less gray hair.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, no, that was the internet was in existence, but it was right at that turning point where they realized that more people were going to start receiving news and journalism online as opposed to in print. And they were trying to figure out how to charge for that, what the cost structure would be. And then they very much were downsizing newsrooms. So, a lot of news organizations weren't retaining large staffs like they used to. They'd have a small core staff, and then a lot of people were freelance, what we call stringers, or what we called stringers at that time. And so it wasn't, a stable job, so to speak, or career as a stringer. So I was thinking to myself, okay, if getting a quote unquote job is not going to be in my future, how can I have so many different skills and different applications of how I can apply my talents that I'll always be in demand? And that actually came in really, really handy in 2020 during the pandemic, because I was able to pivot relatively seamlessly into working in other areas where a lot of other people I knew in the arts struggled to do that.
That's amazing. That's amazing. How things just work out. Speaking of art, was art always a part of your life? Was this something that you spoke about you said your mom gave you the camera, right?
Yeah.
So, but you know, a lot of our parents are like, go be a doctor, go be a lawyer, go do something where you're going to get a big paycheck at the end, you know, to make up for all the hard work that I've done. Did you get that kind of encouragement at home to pursue art as a career?
So this is interesting going into that. So my mother's an educator.
Hmm.
She studied education and she specialized in early childhood development, and just recently retired last year. My father's a musician, jazz musician. He's a bass player. My uncle's a guitar player, Brandon Ross, who is pretty well known amongst musicians, not necessarily in a mainstream sense, although a few notable musicians who I've encountered over the years and maintained a relationship have given me the side eye because they said I should have told them that Brandon was my uncle sooner. They're like, bruh, how are you not going to tell me Brandon was your uncle? I was like, oh, it never came up. And then my grandfather on that side, Clarence Ross, Candy Ross, was a jazz musician, as well as a bunch of cousins on that side of my family. So I had an education and musical family growing up. So the idea that a creative profession could be a viable career was not something that seemed outlandish to my family. And in fact, I've been studying business administration. I don't remember this, but my mother claims that this is true. That when I was like a junior and senior in high school, and I was talking about what I was going to do in college, I was talking about studying business. And she was like, yeah, but you know, you've always really kind of liked photography, Bayeté. Do you think you might want to do something with that? And I was like, nah, mom, what do you know? You don't know anything. Right? So fast forward like 3-4 years, which to me at that age is a long time, to my mom is
Yeah,
nothing.
yeah.
Right? And so I remember having to make the phone call to her like, Mom, I changed my major. I'm not going to be studying business. I'm not going to graduate with an MBA. You know, I'm not going to graduate at the same time I thought I was going to graduate. And I'm like, okay, I have to tell Mom. And I remember I called her, I told her, and she was like, oh, I was wondering when you were going to figure that out.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah, moms are always humble you, parents in general, but I think particularly moms will just, they'll
Mhm.
always humble you with like, you thought all of this was profound, but then they were like, I knew that all along. And as a good mother, I did not interfere. I just sat back and just watched you figure it out on your own.
Yeah, that's some amazing parenting, but also to see that and just be like, I see your gift is in this area. The other one, hey, if that's what you want to do, go for it. That you know, that's incredible. That's actually a rare story, and you're very fortunate to be able to have that support and also that foresight from your mom. From doing so many of these interviews, I find it very rare. You know, most parents are like, so how are you going to pay your bills?
So it's interesting though, because again, I'm fortunate to come from a family that has had a lot of access to formal education. You know, my great grandmother, who I knew, who was alive till I was 17 years old, she was born in 1899. She only had a second grade education, but she raised my grandmother, my great aunt, and my great uncle's generation to really value education and utilize
Mhm.
that as a tool or a stepping stone. So my grandmother's generation, they were the first generation to delve into professional work environment. So even though my grandmother didn't have a college education, she's one of the first Black women to work at Citibank as an administrative assistant and admin support. And then because she
Incredible.
did that, then my mother's generation was able to be the first generation to go to college. And at that point, you know, going to college was just normal. That's what you did after high school. And I say all that to say that because I came from a family devoted to education and also very aware of youth development, the way my elders thought about a career path was more expanded, I think, than a lot of other families, in the sense that they, at the very least, knew that there were things that they didn't know. And they knew that there may be jobs and careers that were not apparent at the moment that could exist in the future. And so it wasn't about what the label of your career would be. It was about what your thought process and plan was for your life moving forward.
That's incredible. That's incredible. Wow. Wow. I love it, and look where that led you. That's why I had to go through that long bio at the beginning, the list of accomplishments. I mean, because you've been walking that walk for as long as I've ever heard your name. I was like maybe like 20 years ago at this point. Sorry for dating it. I'm sorry.
No, it was about 20 years ago. Yeah.
Sorry for doing that to you publicly. Just messing with you. So yeah, I'm really, kind of going into this family history. Your work delves, it seems like no matter what medium you're employing to create your work, or to convey your message, I would really say with your work, there's always some socially engaged content behind what you're presenting, and we'll see that as we start to share the work. Do these directly connect to personal or family histories or narratives?
Well, somewhat. That's a complicated question because it would depend on the specific project.
Sure.
But in general, because I started my career as a visual journalist, I've always had an awareness that it's important to engage the public within the course of their daily lived experience on terms that are comfortable for them. And so that's one of the things that always led me down a path of looking at my artistic practice as something that's created from my personal vision, but also as a public service. And so therefore, it's not all about me. It starts with me, but I also have to incorporate a lot of other viewpoints and perspectives into what I'm creating in order to make it the most viable and most compelling type of artwork that it could be.
Beautiful, beautiful. I love that. I love that. And with that, I want to start jumping into some of these images, and let's use this visual platform to show some of this incredible work. Is it the right one? Yep. Okay, so I'm just going to jump right into this project, Our Kind of People. And
that's
can you?
One of my longest and most successful projects.
It is, as it should be, as it should be. Can you tell us about this incredible work?
Yeah, so this is a series that I created looking at identity and perceptions based on appearance, and I was thinking about how clothing, ethnicity, gender, or even gender perception, class signifiers, as well as just subtle ideas of fashion and even nationality affect our perception of other people. And so with this series, what I wanted to do was look at all the different alter egos that could exist in one person and how you might see them on a daily basis. So I dressed people in all different types of outfits that they all owned, and it was all worn in a style in which they would wear it on a daily basis. So some of you may, looking at this, you may notice that those are of me. And, I did this series at first with myself. So this was years ago. I might not dress, I might not wear, the tank top with the bandana now, but it represents a certain point in my life. So these are nonfiction artworks, even though they're not properly documentary because they're in the studio. And so we use standard white backgrounds to replicate ID portraiture. We kept the lighting and facial expression the same in each image. So the idea is, devoid of any other context of assessing the person in the images, each individual audience member will project their own personal perspective on each version of the same person. And the idea there is to do something that is critically important to my work that I think needs to be done a lot more often in visual image making, which is I'm creating artwork that is not telling the audience what to think, but it's creating a scenario in which they have an experience in which they are forced to question their pre-existing beliefs. So I can't tell you what to think, but I can push you to question your pre-existing beliefs. And that's one of the primary goals of this series. And then by extension, it also raises the question of how do we know what we know? And when you actually pause and think about it, you realize that a lot of what we think we know is arbitrary and sometimes subjective to a specific context of how we frame the world. So it can be true in our personal context, but it might not be true in another context. And I think that's something that's critically important for us to think about as human beings.
That's incredible. And I've read on here that these are in a way they're collaborative, right? You just said you're not playing stylist. These are clothing items that these folks, these models, these collaborators actually wear in their daily life. And so I just want to know a little bit more about your do you consider this a collaborative piece with the subject? I don't know how to frame them. Are they models? Are they collaborators? Are they subjects?
They're all real
all
people.
Of those.
They're all real people. None of them, and models are real people, but when they're modeling, they're not.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm phrasing it that way. They're all real people, and they're all wearing their own clothing, and they are encouraged to pick outfits that represent a range of different aspects of themselves. And then we talk through which outfits they're going to wear usually. And, I only style them in the different outfits in a way that will be the most aesthetically pleasing for the photograph. So I might be like, shift your tie this way, tilt the cap up this way so we can see your eyes, things like that. I don't necessarily make them do things that would be out of character. Now, what I will also do is ask them to pick a range of things, and then together we'll select what the most strikingly different range is. But it always ranges from, very formal down to very casual. And part of it is them representing themselves and them feeling like they're representing themselves in the way in which they want to be seen.
Wow. Yeah, I'm gonna go back to this one because just kind of like looking at him.
Do you know Domingo?
I don't know him. No.
Because he's from the Bay, so I shot these.
Oh wow, that's incredible.
So that was the only reason I was thinking you might know him.
Oh yeah. No, it's just for me, it's like I think just the range of the way that he's styled. You've got the hoodie, and we all know, the coding of the hoodie with Trayvon Martin, especially. But there's also, I think, certain things like the first image with the hat are a little signifiers of his own cultural background in some kind of ways. Or maybe they're not. These are all things that I'm reading, when I see someone and how they dress and how they represent themselves. And so, I just kind of wonder if there was some ideas of directly addressing some of the stereotypes. Like, do I view him very differently when I see him in the suit and tie? And I guess a lot of how you view also depends on your vantage point, right? Or your own connection to that person or someone like him. I would say, and I noticed throughout this project, you also have over the years photographed a range of people, so they're not just all BIPOC folks,
Yeah. Well, it's important to realize that like the same thing applies to people who would be considered white in America. Because to the degree to which they'd be considered white in other parts of the world isn't the same as here, just like the range to which people we would consider Black here or, BIPOC here wouldn't necessarily be the same in other parts of the world. And that's been something that has been really, really interesting in this series, has been how it's perceived in different geographic regions and different communities based on the culture, right? So like here, Domingo is Afro-Latino. So, he'd be considered Latino and Black here.
Mm-hmm.
He wouldn't necessarily be considered Black in parts of Africa, right? And so, and parts of Asia. So that's even interesting. You know, I created some images of a friend of mine who is Chinese American, and his background in terms of biologically, in terms of DNA, is completely Chinese. He's not multiracial East Asian. And I exhibited this series at the Lianzhou Foto Festival, which you mentioned in the intro. Mm-hmm. And I was having this conversation with some of the Chinese people from mainland China at the exhibition. Now, granted, these are people who spoke really good English, so that might be a certain group of Chinese people. But I was having a conversation with them about the different images. And I offhandedly kind of mentioned that the images of Gene, that Gene was Chinese. And they were like, oh, he's Chinese? He doesn't look Chinese to us. And I was
wow.
like, this is deep. Like, how does he not look Chinese to people in China? And it took a lot of discussion, because dealing with the nuances of language with a topic like that it's much more complicated than even being fluent in a language. So I was like, wait, what are you getting at? Like, why is this like? And so we had a fairly extensive conversation. And what I realized was his fashion sense in all the different images was
very American, right?
Well, it was not what they sort of, kind of, maybe not. It was not what they associated with a Chinese guy. They associated that with a Japanese guy.
Oh, wow. Wow, that is interesting. That's so fascinating.
Yeah. So they associated that with and this, again, this happens to be the group of people I was talking to. I don't know if this would be the majority of Chinese people in mainland China, but the group of people I was talking to, which is about 6 or 7 people, they were like, well, we associate that fashion sense with the Japanese guy, or maybe like a really, really hip, Korean dude. And it was really striking to me, because I thought, like, okay, so to a large extent, they're perceiving identity based on fashion, not necessarily based on facial features and facial structure, the way that we would do over here in North America. And just the fact that that could be part of perception based on appearance was really, really interesting to me. Now, again, I don't know if that would change if they saw him on the street and if they weren't seeing photos of him at an art exhibit. But that was something that was really striking to me in terms of all the different ways we can frame identity.
That's beautiful. I love that. You've worked on this project for, several years now at this point, and there's even an active component where folks can go onto your website. So that if you can put the website into the chat, please. And people can there's an interactive experience with this as well. How has this project changed over the years? Or do you think, or how do you think that it's impacted discussions, maybe even?
Yeah, I think the discussions have shifted over the years in terms of people reflecting on more nuanced notions of identity when they see all the different versions of the different people, and then compare the different versions of different people together. So what I mean by that is, like, people also thinking about how they perceive different people differently when those people are wearing the same outfits.
Yeah.
And I've also noticed that by attempting to add an interactive component, while it opens it up to people having more agency in the process of participating in this project, it's reminded me of why professional artists are necessary, because very few of the submissions that I get are precise enough to be something that I would include in an exhibition. They more become things that are submitted for research, because a lot of people won't be disciplined enough to photograph themselves on the same background, trying to keep their head in the same position and creating a broad range of different clothing, which, is fine in terms of them expressing themselves and wanting to be seen. But it's very interesting to, like, even in a time where people are much more used to self-created and self-disseminating media, what they will be aware of and focus on in attention to detail. And the other thing that has struck me is how the perceptions have evolved within a certain ethnicity about all the different perceptions of what that ethnicity could be. So with these images you're looking at now, this is a Black woman, and I know that because she's African American, so she's Black, one drop rule. But not only does she get perceived as different things in different regions of the world, but she gets perceived differently based on social class. And the social class of the people viewing the images. So I was actually showing these images years ago, well, not that long ago, only a few years ago before the pandemic. But I was showing these images in a workshop with youth in Harlem, young people in Harlem who are teenagers. And it was primarily Black and Latina women. And they were talking about what she looked like and when she looked the most professional and when she looked the least professional, and all different attributes of social class. And so a lot of them automatically noticed the one of her in the suit when her hair is straight as being the most professional.
Oh, wow.
It's the same outfit as when she's wearing the braids. And this is a group of women that, young women, who definitely knows that the one with the braids is more like how her hair naturally grows out of her head. And then in addition, some of these women had family members who'd worked in the medical industry. And after a few minutes of conversation, they were like, oh, but the one with the scrubs, that could be highly professional too. And you kind of reference, I don't know if you said it specifically, but you kind of made a reference to like what professions people in Black and brown communities often think are like the pinnacle of success. And being in medical professions is often that. But yet these young women, they had actually really interesting conversation about that, about like, oh, why didn't we have the visual cue that being in scrubs could be highly professional as well, even though a significant number of us have people who are in medical professions in our families and in our communities.
That's why I love the way the conversations that these pieces bring up, and encourage people to have, with themselves, because I know for sure I'm asking myself questions. Well, why am I gravitating more towards an image and see that as this person is more approachable, even though it's the same person, depending on how they're dressing, even though the expression is not changing. I think we've been socialized to read certain cues in certain ways, whether that's like coming from the media or that's our own experiences of family members and friends or people we've encountered. And so I think it's just an inspiring project just from that perspective alone. But yet, let alone you traveling around and having conversations with folks from different groups all together, talking about their perceptions of the pieces. I would love to hear what the audience that's joined us thinks about these as well. Jumping right into the next body of work, though, I don't know if you knew that I was going to do this one. But I'm really fascinated by this series for multiple reasons. I think some of them immediately obvious for some of us, especially when we see a Black person with a target on them. Though again, within the series that folks can see on your website, not every subject is necessarily Black that you've engaged through this project. But I think putting yourself is really critical also as a starting point.
That's true. It's also easiest in terms of actually doing it, right? Because I basically started this project playing around with outtakes from the Our Kind of People series.
Oh, wow.
So I went to a gun range, a firing range, actually in the Bay, called Jackson Arms. Really good range. Everyone's very professional. I really have enjoyed my experience every time I've been there. I haven't been there in a bit because I don't live in California anymore. But I really enjoy and appreciate going to Jackson Arms. But I was there, this is years ago, and I noticed that none of the targets looked like actual people you would know. And this has borne out to be consistent with every gun range I've gone to in the United States. And I will acknowledge that I have not done like a gun range tour in every state. I've only been to firing ranges in California and New York and Alabama and North Carolina. Yeah, but the point is, I noticed that none of the targets looked like, people you might see on a daily basis. They either were silhouettes or they looked like caricatures of like visual tropes from an action movie. And they had like and these gun ranges, not just Jackson Arms, but a lot of them, they have every visual trope imaginable. You know what I mean? Like they have the villain of each type. Like they have the black gangbanger, like the white gang, like the Latino gang member. They have the Arab dude with the rocket propelled grenade launcher. They got the white guy with like a beard and sunglasses, and he's abducting a woman, and he looks like a kidnapper or a trafficker. So they have like all these different tropes of bad guys. And then they have just the silhouettes. Actually, there's a really interesting episode of the TV show Atlanta about the types of targets people bring to the gun range. I want to say it's in the Justin Bieber episode, but it's really, really funny. But anyway, so they have all these different types, but none of them look like someone you might see in the course of daily life. And we all know, based on statistics, that if you're going to be involved in interpersonal violence, it's more likely to be someone who looks like one of your neighbors than type of person. So I became curious about what would happen if I put an easily recognizable human face on a target, and then I made these targets, and then some of them I took to firing ranges and shot them. And then in some cases, I shot them with people who were in the pictures of the targets. But part of why it was most efficient for me to start with myself was because it was easier for me, because my friends had taken the time to pose for me for my photo series, and then I had to hit them up like, hey, is it okay if I make your photo into a target and then shoot with a bunch of different types of firearms? So I think by me doing it myself first, it kind of made that a little easier. But I do have to say, is another moment where it's like I have really great and supportive friends and a really great and supportive community, because everyone was like, yeah, that's okay. And I was like, you might see images of you as a target shot for years to come. Like, are you cool with that? And they're like, yeah, that's cool. We like what you're doing.
That is incredible.
Like, wow, that's like, it's one of those subtle things. Every now and then I think about it. It makes me a little emotional, of like, each one of those people who I have as targets is someone who trusted me with their image and believed in what I do as an artist enough to be like, yeah, go ahead, shoot my picture with a bunch of different guns.
Yeah, I also saw,
and display it at a variety of different venues around the world.
Yeah, that's some serious trust right there. I mean, I also saw on your website where, there's a video where folks are shooting their own image, and that fascinated me. I didn't pull a clip from that to share, but that whole part of like you actually shooting yourself as a target and then inviting other folks to come in and shoot themselves as a target was wild. I was expecting, through the video for someone to just kind of have a panic attack or just, there's something wild about that.
True confession though, it actually wasn't that profound. Like,
no.
It was like one of those things that sounds like, oh wow, but then something about, at least I would say, human nature of our generations for a split second, it was like, oh, this is weird. But then after that, it just became about target practice and everyone wanting to be as precise as possible with their targets, not even looking like ourselves anymore, just looking at like a target, which is, which became an interesting anecdote, less of an interesting artwork. But yeah, that actually, even though it doesn't sound like it, became one of the least profound aspects of the project, which initially I thought would be one of the most profound, but it wasn't.
I mean, I think the remnant of it, the artifact that you have left over, at least the video, when I was watching it, it made me think a lot, about the people, and what if the people that you're judging or thinking that are other are actually just a reflection of yourself. Yes. There's so many things that come up with looking at that project. I encourage people to look at it and see what you think of it. Maybe in the making of it, it was a different process.
But that's part of the point, Dimitri, is like, I had this idea that this would be like this really profound experience, and the perception and speculation about that became much bigger than what it actually was. And that, I think, is what's so interesting about art and media.
Right? Yeah, for sure.
The idea of like seeing the images and then reflecting on what the audience thinks is the idea of it actually became so much stronger than the actual experience of people doing it. Like, I thought it would be like a profound performance, and it wasn't. It really was about the viewers knowing that happened, or seeing that happened, and then projecting their own personal experience onto it. And that was really
sure. And then, I would be remiss to not show this image right here.
That's me when I was little. I was very adorable.
Yes, you were, for sure.
I had a lot more.
Yeah, I mean, but just the image right here of a sweet young child being looked at as a target. We recently had an artwork at MOAD that was dealing with Tamir Rice, and just the sense of the lack of kids of color, but particularly young Black boys, being able to have this period of what should be a period of innocence, and being able to be a child and play with the toy gun in the park, or whatever you may have. So this image really moved me.
Yeah, so I actually made this after Tamir Rice got killed, and I had thought about doing an image like this previously. And then, I said to myself, like, wow, I tell you, that's really over the top. Like, you don't need to overdo it. Like, that's way too extreme. You're going to be trying too hard. And then Tamir Rice got killed, and I had been having a conversation with a friend of mine who lives in Cleveland. He actually is an aerospace engineer for NASA and works at the Glenn Research Center in Cleveland. And we were talking about what age, this is like maybe a month before it, like what age do Black boys get perceived as adults, as opposed to kids? And then after Tamir Rice got killed, this is maybe a day after, if not the same day, he texted me like, well, we have our answer, which was really sad. The other thing that was really sad about that, to me, as someone who is, I'm not like Mr. Firearm, like Second Amendment, National Association of Black Gun Owners type of guy. Like, I shoot from time to time because it's fun and it's useful to understand how guns work, and it's can potentially be a useful skill to have. But I do know a little bit about gun laws in different parts of the country. And Ohio, where Tamir Rice was killed, at the time, I'm not sure if it still is, but I'm sure, I think it is, at the time was an open carry state. And so in an open carry state, you can openly carry a firearm on your person as long as people can see it. So it became really interesting to me, especially once the video came out, that they saw him with this toy gun, and they supposedly thought it was a real gun and thought he was an adult, but yet they shot him immediately, even in a state where people are allowed to openly carry a firearm. Like, you would think that the police would be prepared to interact with people who might have firearms with them in an open carry state. So it just showed to me how the rules and guidelines are disregarded when it comes to certain people.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think just thinking about that and how the impacts of that particular situation still haven't left us, that makes this image even just more. It has this lasting impact, but also, the conversation is real. It's something that we're still trying to deal with. We're still trying to contend with to this day as to who can have the right to openly carry. Jumping back into that again, moving on. Sorry, just because of time, we gotta keep the ball rolling a little bit. I'm jumping into your VR work, and so we will talk a little bit about the Red Summer VR. I'll show it in just a second, but there's also the New York Times 360 VR projects. Before I press play on this and show folks a little bit about this, what really fascinates me and I think is incredible is how you go to these sites of violence, and mostly violence, whether that's real violence where someone is left dead at the end, or a situation with Ruby Bridges, which we'll cover in a minute, where these folks are either having like physical violence, emotional violence, or some kind of trauma. You're going to the present day and then blending in the past through your video work. Why is it important for you to bring the past into the present? And I don't know if that's an obvious question or.
Yeah, I think when you deal with specific sites, it also adds an additional level of resonance. So the Red Summers VR looks at the history of racialized domestic terrorism in the United States. And we focus on 4 years between 1917 and 1921. But this was part of a continuum that stretches back, to the 1890s, possibly earlier, and extended into the late 1930s, where you have white mobs attacking Black people in Black communities. And most of these incidents aren't commonly known by most people who go to high school in the United States. So there's a significant amount of cover-up about these incidents having taken place. But also what I found really interesting when I started researching these incidents is that as we came up on the centennials of a lot of them, like East St. Louis, 1917, Chicago and Washington, D.C., 1919, Tulsa, 1921, as we came up on the centennials, when we looked at the social and political issues that kind of were the catalyst for this violence, a lot of them were very similar to what we were facing today and what people were saying were dividing our country. And I think, implicitly people were acting as if these were new divisions or these types of divisions were unprecedented, when really they're long-standing divisions, they're long-standing agitators for violence that we didn't deal with 100, 120, 150 years ago. So all these issues are still rearing their heads now. And these are things like migration policy. 100 years ago, it was the Great Migration of Black people. Now it's Black and brown people from countries in Latin America and other parts of the world. Economic and labor issues. Back then they had segregated unions. You have a global pandemic. We had COVID, they had the Spanish flu. Global insecurity based on global conflict, World War I. We have all these different global conflicts now. You can take your pick. So there's a lot of similarities. The other one that really struck me was bias in the press. 100 years ago, you have a Black press and a white press, which are giving you very different depictions of stories that are happening. And there's a sensationalism around violence and sensationalizing violence being on the rise. And of course, in the white press, whenever a Black person committed a violent act, they were identified by race. But when a white person did it, it was just like, oh, this is a violent incident that happened. So I saw all these similarities, and I thought it'd be very significant to give people the experience of standing on a site where historic violence took place and then blending in historic imagery from that event so people got the feeling of looking back in time.
That is incredible. That's incredible. I'm gonna play this, or at least a segment of it.
Yeah, so this is 360 VR, so you can look in every direction. You can watch this on desktop and mobile and with the headset.
So in
you know,
Chicago during 1919, there's a confrontation at a beach. A young man seemingly crosses a line the white community sees as a white space. He is confronted and there are stones thrown at him and he ultimately drowns. The young man who was killed, his name was Eugene Williams. And as a result, there is a confrontation that happens between the Black and white citizens. There's a Black police officer who attempts to arrest one of the white men involved in the death of this young person, and he's prevented from doing so. And tensions continue to rise, and you start to see where white mob violence escalates.
There's a lot of chaos. People are very angry on both sides, and the rumors get wild very fast. Violence just starts erupting all over Chicago. And this was an incredibly important economic powerhouse for the country. The stockyards provided meat for the nation, basically, and suddenly the city's immobilized. The violence ranged. You'd have these gangs roaming around, attacking people with rocks, knives, guns.
And there are people who go into communities basically killing random Black people, burning down homes and preventing fire trucks to come in and put out fires. They destroy a whole area in Chicago where African Americans lived, worked, and played.
So literally for days, the second largest city in the country was in total chaos.
Around 1915, you have President Woodrow Wilson, who screens Birth of a Nation in the White House, a film that depicts African American men as brutal beings, desirous of white women, and the protectors of society, and these white women are the Klan. So the racial climate in the United States during the period of 1917 to early 1920s was society viewing African Americans as second-class citizens, people in positions of authority.
I'm gonna just pause right there so we can talk a little bit more about this piece.
Let me just say that what she's about to say there is people in positions of authority were members of the Klan.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you know, people in judges, governors, mayors, that's how it was back then, which is not so long ago.
Yeah, not so long ago, exactly. And we've got this imagination, or we're taught to believe that maybe this stuff just vanished magically with the signing of the Civil Rights Bill. With this tour, is the VR folks are supposed to, you can do this, you can engage with this physically while you're moving around Chicago to these different spots, or?
So no, that's something that I'd be interested in doing. I would need a local partner that was very diligent about making it into a walking tour. I mean, you can find these locations. If you're from Chicago, you'll recognize a lot of them. And that's how it is with all the different films in the Red Summers VR series. So there's 5 films that cover 7 locations. And, you know, people from these cities will recognize where they're from. They'll see that these are streets they walk on a regular basis, and they'll see what happened on these sites, you know, 100 years ago, and how that directly connects with what they're dealing with now. But the way it functions, we published this with The Guardian. And you can experience this again on desktop. You can also experience it on mobile, as well as using a headset. And if you use a mobile device, well, a phone, I should say, and then use like even something as simple as a Google Cardboard headset, it will give you the feeling of being immersed. So you get to look in every direction. So you feel like you're standing on a site without having to travel to that site, and you get to look back in time.
That is incredible. I love that. I love that. And I mean, I love how you seamlessly blended in the physical location and what was there at the time. So even, you know, me looking on my screen right now, I'm imagining what it looked like 100 years ago on these sites.
Yeah.
And all these, you know, places that were destroyed and now have a completely different business standing on those same corners.
Yeah. But then, you know, I think the other thing that, again, is really significant is that these are not incidents that a lot of people know about.
Mm-hmm.
In certain places, even in the places where they happened, a lot of people don't know about them. Now, Chicago's a bit different because they actually put together a race commission to study this incident. And so they were very thorough. But when you look at like Washington, D.C., like very few people know about that race riot. If you were to talk about, and these were acts of domestic terrorism too, so we're trying to reframe them. But the historic proper name for them is race riot.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, when you talk about riots based on race and you were to ask your average American, like, what is a race riot? And actually Cameron McWhirter, who is one of the voices in a couple of our episodes, he wrote a really, really excellent book called Red Summer about these incidents in 1919. But one of the things he said when we interviewed him was, he said, you know, if you were to ask the average citizen, what is a race riot? What's an example of a race riot? You know, the average person would probably say, oh, do you mean Washington, D.C. in 1968, or maybe Watts, or, you know, maybe you mean 1992 after Rodney King. Some people might even think of Baltimore in 2015. But the reality is, you know, that the vast, vast majority of what would be considered race riots over the course of United States history have been white mobs attacking Black people and Black communities and Black property. And that's just an indisputable fact based on the numbers and the dollar amount of destruction when you know, adjust for inflation.
Wow. Yeah, had no idea about that. I'm sorry to say that I didn't know that. I'm gonna just pop over real quick because I want to make sure we cover your most recent project with the Got the Power Boombox series.
Yeah, I'm hoping to do one of these in the Bay.
Oh, that would be amazing.
Stay tuned. I think I might be able to figure out a way to work it out.
I love that. I love that. And I put the link in the bottom here so folks can actually go. If you go to Bayeté's website, you can click on these. One of the things that I really loved about it and thoroughly enjoyed was listening to the playlist that accompanies the pieces.
Yeah. So this is a site-specific series of sculptures that I've created at various places around the world that are made out of vintage boomboxes. And then the sculptures play a soundtrack that's comprised of local people's favorite songs and then their oral histories about that community.
That's incredible. I love that. I love that.
I've done them in a variety of different places, but currently there's still sculptures installed in Hartford, Connecticut. This one here is in Montgomery, Alabama, in the sculpture garden for the Montgomery Museum of Fine Art. And there's also one that I installed in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. And there's one that is installed in Kiev in Ukraine.
Wow, no way.
A couple of months ago, I was informed that it was still there. You know, I haven't wanted to.
That is incredible.
Ask about that, recently, because I feel like there's much bigger issues than me being like,
sure.
Hey, did my sculpture get blown up or not? But you know, that could be a bit insensitive. I'm being a little bit humorous, but it's a serious issue, right?
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
But it was still there for a bit. So, you know, bringing oral history and music to these different locations around the world that reflect the communities in which they're installed was really significant to me, because I see these as kind of physical sculptures that have a presence, but also they emit audio portraits about the communities they're installed in.
Oh my gosh, I love them. And I love that some of them are these more abstract sculptures like we're seeing right here, and others take on kind of a robot humanoid
Some of them are in the form of a figure. The one in Hartford and the one in Addis kind of look like a figure. They look like a robot.
Oh, wow. Wow. Today is very excited. You've got one in her home city of Addis.
Oh, nice, nice.
Yeah, I'm gonna just jump in this last couple of minutes. Thank you for everyone for staying with us. But this is part of one of these projects that is permanently installed here in Oakland. And so I have to show a little bit about this one through the question bridge, which I think is one of your earlier projects
that we can say makes us who we are.
I could never assume that just because we look the same, that I in fact would have more in common with you than not.
What is common that makes us who we are is universal, is our strength.
I mean, that's a profound question. And I think because we are not monolithic, the thing that we have in common, and I'm not being facetious when I say this, the thing that we have in common is that we are male and we are Black.
Yeah, I just I visit that project so many times, and I know that was a collaborative project. We interviewed Chris Johnson a little while ago on the show. We mentioned that also with Hank as well.
We can't forget Kamal. It was Kamal's idea to do the website, and it was Kamal's idea to do the curriculum, and she wrote all of that.
Oh, that's incredible! Wow. Yeah, so I had to put a little plug on that one because it's one of the ones that I visit with my family, all family members, whenever we go to the Oakland Museum, and everyone adores it.
We're really happy that it's able to be in the Oakland Museum's collection. That was a real honor, and it makes us feel like the work is really getting to engage with people and be experienced in a way in which it's needed.
Mm-hmm. Very, very, very much so. Yeah. And then just the ability to be able to have generational conversations. My kids who are much younger are discussing, perceptions of Black males with their grandparents, and, just the ability to have a project that brings so much dialogue. And I think that's what connects all of your work. Again, it's very socially engaged, but not just talking about the issue, but in this active way of actually making, I think making change and instilling people to think about ways that we can make change.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would say my work is about why do we think what we think, why we think we know what we know, and how that shifts based on our framing of the world, so we can understand how other people think and have more productive conversations and reflections on how to solve a lot of society's most pressing challenges.
I love it. Bayeté, what's next for you? Where can we see work coming up in the future? And what are you working on?
Yeah, so I have an exhibition of Our Kind of People at Columbia Law School as part of me being the inaugural artist in residence. I'm also working on another boombox sculpture that I'm hoping to do here in New York. I have to finalize the agreements there. I'm going to be doing some work based on criminal justice and legal policy reform. I don't have definitive dates for that, but that's coming up in the new year. I've just actually earlier today, I was on some emails with some folks planning that out. And there's a chance I might return to South Africa and do some work with them down there around perception based on ethnicity and culture, working with the US Embassy and some of the universities and art organizations down there. So there's a lot coming up in the new year that I have to have finalized, but there's some exciting stuff on the horizon.
As always, that's incredible. I love to hear about that, and I love that you're continuing to bring the work to this international audience. Thank you so much today. Put your website into the chat, and Nancy says, keep up the great work. She's been a huge fan for so long.
Yeah, I know Nancy. It's great that you're on here. Oh, I appreciate it. Yeah. Like Nancy was following my work when I was just like another artist roaming the streets of the Bay. So I went to grad school out in the Bay. So I spent a good amount of time out there. And yeah, it's great to see people still be following my work and still be supportive, and also for me to give them a reason to still pay attention to.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, folks can find out more about Bayeté's work on his website. Are there other places we should be looking?
You can follow me on social media. I'm most active on Instagram, so it's at Bayeté Keenan. I'm on Twitter, but I'm not like a hardcore constant tweeter. Those are the two prime places, and you can always go to my website to see what new stuff I'm doing as well.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for this amazing conversation, and also just for the work that you do. You're so inspiring. You've always been inspiring, but I love to see you, keeping it up and growing. And, it just really makes me want to go hit the studio myself and think a little bit more about, how my work can have the impact that yours is clearly having on this huge scale.
Well, I appreciate that, Dimitri, because you could talk to a lot of different people and bring a lot of different people onto this platform, and you chose me. And that's not a little thing. So I appreciate you, bro. Like it's important.
Humbled by you.
And I could make all my work and think it's great work, but we need other folks. We need folks like you putting us on these platforms and giving us this outlet to directly connect with different audiences. So that's not a small thing, So appreciate the work you're doing. We've known each other for a bit. So, I see your path and your work and your trajectory too, and I'm very appreciative of it. So thank you, bro.
Oh, thanks, Bayeté. Have a wonderful evening, man. It's always great. Always great.
Yeah. Have a happy holiday, happy new year. And let's chat more in the new year.